Hello everyone, my name is Michelle Soto and I want to welcome you to our next installment of our virtual Shakespeare lessons with the Philadelphia Shakespeare Theater. Today we're going to be talking about Romeo and Juliet, and specifically I want to dive into the plot, the themes, and the timeline of events that take us from the prologue to the ending of the play. Romeo and Juliet is a piece that's read in English classes and drama classes all around the world every year because it has pieces of the story that everybody can identify with. Even though Shakespeare's language may seem archaic, old, confusing, or maybe even sometimes in another language, it is through the themes that we can realize that the things he's covering, the things he's talking about, are things that are still relevant and happening to all of us every day today in 2020 or whenever you may be watching this video. Many of the themes covered in Romeo and Juliet focus on the self and on interpersonal relationships. We've got self-determination, we've got self-empowerment, and we've got the power plays, the dynamics between parents and children, royalty, the prince and the parents, power plays between the friar and the government, the friar and the parents, the friar and the children. And then we have some of the other power plays between the two families. We've got Tybalt and Mercutio. We've got so much going on between people in Romeo and Juliet. And I think it goes to show that the power of Shakespeare and the power of Romeo and Juliet really lies in the power of words and the power of the people that he's telling us all about. Part of Romeo and Juliet is that the parents and the families of both Romeo and Juliet are fighting with each other. And Lord Capulet has decided Juliet is going to marry Paris, and Romeo is continually falling in love with people he maybe shouldn't be falling in love with. They are fighting between the families because of the power plays between children and parents, and the parents' parents, and the parents' parents. This is a feud that's been going on for a really long time. So by Romeo and Juliet taking their fate into their own hands, we get self-determination. What are we going to do? How am I going to control my future? How am I going to control my destiny? Self-empowerment. I have the power to be with this person that I love. I'm going to take control of my life. Now, these children, Romeo and Juliet, being so empowered was really something that would shock people, because in Elizabethan England, Shakespeare's time, children were the property of the parents, and women and girls were the property of their parents until they married, and then they became property of their husbands. So the fact that these children, these teenagers, these young people would step out and tell the world, no, I'm in control of my destiny, was something romantic and huge that some people still would find a bit controversial today. Some people might consider the plot of Romeo and Juliet to be fairly straightforward. Boy and girl meet. Boy and girl fall in love. Boy and girl can't be together because their parents don't like each other. Girl's supposed to marry somebody else. Boy and girl elope. Boy is exiled. Girl fakes her death so she can be with the boy. Boy returns, thinks she's really dead, and then they both die. That could be Romeo and Juliet. But there's so much more that happens in the pages of the script. And I want to think about how the plot might look for Lady Capulet, how the plot might look for Tybalt, how the plot might look for Paris or the prince. And that's when we're going to get into today's activity. We're going to be creating a timeline of events of Romeo and Juliet, thinking about the themes that we talked about earlier, and telling the story of Romeo and Juliet. Now, maybe your version of the timeline is Juliet's timeline, or it is Romeo's timeline. But I encourage you to think about how these themes are present when you consider other members of the Montague and Capulet families, or other members of the community. I want you to create a timeline for Romeo and Juliet, the play. It doesn't have to be about Romeo or Juliet. It could be for any character. and I want you to follow the traditional narrative arc that you'd get in a story. So exposition, narrative hook, rising action, climax, falling action, resolution. And I want you to keep in mind the themes that we talked about earlier in the video. So self-empowerment, power dynamics, self-determination. And I want you to tell me what Romeo and Juliet is about, considering those themes, and a piece of the story that resonates with you. Your timeline could be Tybalt's timeline. Your timeline could be the Friar's timeline. Or your timeline could be Romeo or Juliet's timeline. Whatever timeline you choose to create or character you choose to focus on, I want you to also tell me why you chose to highlight these certain pieces of the story or this certain character in the story. What are the motivations or the reasons behind you choosing to create this timeline? Do you really resonate with Tybalt? Do you know what it's like to fall in love for the first time? Do you know what it's like to fight with the people who take care of you? I want this journal entry that you make to go with your timeline to tell us why you chose to include some pieces of the story, why you chose to leave other pieces out. Because everybody who reads Romeo and Juliet takes something different from it. The 14-year-old Michelle who read Romeo and Juliet in 9th grade read a very different play than the grown-up Michelle who's reading Romeo and Juliet now for these lessons, or the Michelle who read Romeo and Juliet in college. So what you're experiencing now might not be what somebody sitting next to you is experiencing, but it also might not be what you'll experience in 5, 10, 15 years when you interact with Romeo and Juliet again and again and again. So tell me what you think is important and why it's important in this timeline. What is your Romeo and Juliet today, right now? I want to remind you that in the description of this video, we have a link to the document and an example of the timeline, as well as a link to our YouTube channel where you can find our other Romeo and Juliet lessons and educational resources. I want to thank you for joining us for this virtual Shakespeareans today, and remind you that we've got some more Romeo and Juliet content coming up for the rest of the month of September.